Hello and welcome to this week's Newspeak. As usual, I'm very, very pleased to say we have Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, our senior fellow royal historian, and Amy Gallagher, who is the lady behind Stand Up to Woke, and of course, Dr. Philip Kiszely, our other senior fellow, who is also at Leeds University. We're going to be talking about various events, how this simply appalling government is also shaping up at the moment. Before I do that, a couple of things actually wanted to, which I don't think we've mentioned before. First of all, do follow us on other sorts of social media because they're really kind of taking off at the moment. And so, for example, our Twitter account has now got about 21,000 on it. And essentially, okay, we're quite, in some ways, a little bit late in the game. But anyway, they're going very, very strong now. Do follow us on Twitter at New Culture Forum. And also on Facebook. Do go along and join the community on those platforms, won't you? Apart from this one, YouTube. And also, you might see something different about the set. And see our history, our culture, our future. That is our new tagline for the New Culture Forum. It will appear on everything. I think you'll agree it's pretty much sums us up. And also it sums up in just a very nice way of actually transcribing Edmund Burke's original definition of society. The past, what we are now, and what is to come. So that's our new tagline. Hope you like it. Answers on a postcard, please. Right, first things, Rafe. Immigration, of course, balking large as always. But particularly this week, Labour have put forward some plans about how they're going to deal with it. Is it legal we're talking about or illegal?
This is about illegal immigration, and Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, has come out with some very tough-sounding language, saying that we have now taken strong and clear steps to tackle illegal immigration, secure the borders, and deport asylum seekers. And if you're the average person actually reading the press release and so forth, you would be inclined to think actually that they're finally getting on and doing what the Tories never did, because it does sound good. And they say, quite clearly, that the Tories talk tough but didn't do anything. We're actually getting on with the job, which includes, for example, deporting. The big taglines are they're going to deport criminals at the same levels as under Theresa May in 2018. They're going to increase the number of spaces in detention centres. They're going to fund the National Crime Agency in order to increase the work on tackling gangs, and they're going to work with EU member states to smash the routes coming in. All sounds great until, of course, you look in the detail, because the devil is in the detail here, unfortunately, and it just goes to show that none of these measures are going to make one jot of difference in the great scheme of things. For example, bringing the number of deportations back to the 2018 level, that was only in 2018, only 14,000 asylum seekers were deported. That's 1/3 of what Gordon Brown's Labour Party were doing in 2010 when they had 45,000 people being deported. To put this in context, 14,000 deportations is their goal. We had 20,000 illegal immigrants come here just this year alone, and just this year alone, 68,000 applications were declined. That's about 80,000 people in total, 90,000 almost. 14,000 isn't going to do a single thing. Again, expanding the number of spaces in detention centres. Well, they're going to expand it by 292, giving you about 3,000 spaces. 3,000 compared to the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of people who should be in these places, rather than in migrant hotels and everywhere else. We should be building more detention centres. We should be building temporary refugee camps and emptying the hotels. We should be building temporary detention camps for those who are being deported, and putting far more people in there, rather than having many of them who are criminals, for example, roaming the streets of this country. Then again, funding the National Crime Agency to work on tackling the gangs. Well, that's all well and good. But as Matt Goodwin has shown, once you smash one gang, it's like a multi-headed hydra. Two more will come up to fill that space. That's not a way to do it. And also, again, working with the EU to try to smash the roots and so forth. I'm sorry, but these gangs are often based in Iran, they're based in Sudan and Syria, in these places. These aren't areas where any amount of EU involvement is going to work towards it. And of course, ultimately, at the end of the day, how are you going to be able to return people to countries where you don't have any agreement with? Yes, you can return people to Albania. How can you return them to Afghanistan or to Iraq or to Syria or Eritrea? These are the countries that are in the top 5 of where we draw our asylum seekers from. So, it's, once again, tough sounding stuff. And also, of course, nothing preventing any of these deportees from just invoking Labour's old Human Rights Act and putting the whole thing back into the courts. No plan here, obviously, to tackle the ECHR. So, once again, just like under the Tories, a lot of tough talk, but very little substance.
Apparently, actually, I saw a clip this week in relation to this, but not in relation to this, actually, coincidentally, with Priti Patel, where she was sort of outright claiming things that just simply didn't happen.
Oh,
she was known, wasn't she, for being very tough talking?
Yeah, but she presided over a huge increase in immigration. I think Rafe's perfectly correct in everything he says there, and he summed it up beautifully. But I think there's something else as well, and it's almost like an exercise in gaslighting this, isn't it? We've got this sense that they're talking about these figures from 2018, and of course we're talking, what is it, 68,000 here. It's just, they just don't tally. But what I think she's saying implicitly is we're going to make an industry out of this. They're here to stay, and we're starting with these detention centres, but we're going to build much more of them. We're going to employ many more people in this industry, and it's just here to stay. It's this kind of negative speak, isn't it? We're doing all of these things, but actually what we're really going to do is this. And all you need to be able to do is just read between the lines. And it's not just about this, it's about all the other things. As I always say pretty much every week, all of this stuff is connected, isn't it? And what you have is this kind of complete opposite of what's going to happen. And that's the really frightening thing. And this is the thing that we have to push back on. I'm thinking about how we push back all the time here. And it's pointing out not only the inaccuracies and the downright lies, it's the actual gaslighting. That's the thing that I'm concerned about. We are going to do this. We're going to build this into a big industry. We're going to employ people, and we're going to embrace it. Essentially, that's what she's saying.
Yes, I suppose what irritated me about the approach of Labour, even when they were in opposition, it was all about smashing the gangs, which actually is a different emphasis, isn't it? It's sort of like, it's not actually these poor people who are being exploited. I just don't accept that anyway. I mean, it's as simple as that, But it was all about somehow smashing the criminal gangs.
Yeah, the emphasis was on stopping the traffickers rather than the people that were paying them to be able to cross the channel, which is so Labour, isn't it? It's kind of making a victim out of the people that are crossing the channel, who are deciding of their own accord to cross the channel, and it's usually young men who are doing so. But yeah, as soon as Labour got in power, they dropped the Rwanda plan, which I know a lot of people were unhappy with, but it did mean at least there was something in place in the unlikely event that we were out of the ECHR and no longer under human rights laws. There was a plan to deport some people somewhere, but that's gone by the wayside already. And we've seen recently that, the human rights laws are being, as Rafe said, are being used to mean that people can appeal their deportations even if they've committed crimes. There's been we had the case of Abdul Azidi, who was the man that threw acid in a woman's face. His claim was rejected twice. He still remained in the country, went on to commit a sexual-based crime, and then appealed his deportation by claiming he was a Christian. And there was a recent example of a Kurdish man who I spoke about on the show last week, who pushed a 61-year-old man onto the tube tracks on the underground. Luckily, he was safe because people helped him back up. But he was found to have a long history of committing crime in this country. His asylum claims were rejected, but he still remained here. So essentially, once you're in and you can stay, because all you can do is appeal to human rights laws and just claim to be you're discriminated against in some way, and you can remain here.
Yes, but you see, when you say all you have to do is appeal, under that kind of legislation, also it requires will to do something about it. I mean, the people who administer this stuff, I just don't have any faith in them at all. I mean, this guy, the tube guy, right? He, as you say, he had as long as you're armed, indeed, of offences. And so what is the situation with him now? So he is, awaiting trial? Or what?
Now he's been sentenced to 11 years for pushing this Polish chap onto the tracks But as Amy was saying, this chap had 21 convictions for prior things, including assault, antisocial behaviour, and outraging public decency. At what point do these people actually get deported? And if not only that, but why are they being allowed to roam the streets? As again, 2 sexual assaults of this person in Clapham who threw the corrosive acid on this woman and her young daughter. If these people are being on a wait list for deportation, they should be in a detention centre, right? We need to build more of these places. That's what they're designed for. The Home Secretary has a legal statutory duty to deport any criminal who is non-British who has a criminal conviction for more than 12 months. That's under the under the Immigration Act. But they also have a ministerial discretion to deport anybody who they believe to be a risk to society. So the problem, of course, is that those are now being hampered by the Human Rights Act, which enable anyone just to do that. And then the ECHR interprets all of this stuff so loosely and so broadly that you can get. Do you remember when there was somebody who had a cat and had a right to a lifestyle, and it was the existence of this cat in this country that prevented them from being deported? That's when Theresa May was Home Secretary under the Conservatives. This happened, but the idea, after all of the last few years of the Labour Party condemning the Tories for wanting to leave the ECHR, the idea that they're going to now try to deal with this, I just think it's for the birds.
And it's not just 1 or 2 isolated instances of real psychosis or real criminality. There are so many of them. If you just think back over the last few months, how many times have you read in the Daily Mail or any of the papers or online all of these crazy instances? I think they represent psychotic elements of particular cultures. Okay, so there's something about this. This guy said that the Polish guy had disrespected him, and it's an extreme version of the honour system in a way, isn't it? That we are seeing on the streets of Britain. I feel actually quite self-conscious talking about this because it's quite dangerous to talk about this, isn't it? But it is an extreme, psychotic version of that set of cultural practices that we know and that we see and which are separate to British cultural practices. And when they go wrong, as they often do, because many of these people have been through horrendous things and come from horrendous places, we are on the receiving end of it, and it's very frightening.
Yes, I mean, we had, I always say we had that era of honour culture back in the times of Romeo and Juliet, for example, so that we had that, but we outgrew that. But, the rise of honour killings, the clue is in the name. Many, if not most, acid attacks are linked to being disrespected. We also see it, of course, in the gangs in South London and East London and elsewhere. If you disrespected somebody on the bus, that's a lot of the stabbings come out because of that. It's a real issue that's been imported into this country.
It's also, I was thinking that where the penny seems to be dropping a bit lately is in the fact that women and young girls are increasingly the objects of this kind of thing. Yeah. When you feel a slight shift. So we had obviously Taylor Swift dance class. We all know what happened there. But there was also this terrorist attack. Was it Germany or a thwarted terrorist attack in Germany?
Austria.
Austria. Again, where you're talking about young girls at a Taylor Swift concert.
Yeah, exactly. And just coming back to the throwing an acid in a woman's face, that's also about erasing a woman's whole identity and her face. There is we don't have those kind of ideas here, but it comes from very patriarchal cultures. But we spoke about it on the show not long ago. There was a recent report from the Royal College of Policing that showed that in the last 5 years, violence towards women and girls has gone up by 40%. There was a survey out recently from British Transport Police that has shown that in the last couple of years, violence and sexual harassment on trains has gone up by 50%. We know just generally, I feel it myself, people just more anecdotally talking about their experiences of sexual harassment, sexual assault, of the culture just not feeling quite the same as it used to. And it is because of the rise of, immigration. That's what people are linking it to. That's what people are linking to, but not what our political class are linking it to.
And that's the key thing, isn't it?
Although there's still a fair amount of denial on the part of certain people to actually admit that this might be the case. You know, I mean, people who've even been, in some cases, I've heard who've been on the receiving end of it. They sort of don't want to look at that aspect of it. This sort of really, in some ways, brings us on to this other announcement this week, which is that, and I'm not quite sure which stage it's at, but from Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, that we should see misogyny become a terrorist offence.
Yeah.
Or rather, have I got that the right way round, Amy?
Yeah, she says she wants to review the government's current counter-extremism strategy and is proposing that extreme misogyny is made a part of that, and that extreme misogyny is seen as being as equally vital to tackle as, say, something like extreme Islamism. I mean, first of all, a lot of us would say there's quite a big overlap between
on to that.
Yeah, extremism within Islam and extreme misogyny. But of course, people are reacting quite strongly to this because they say, well, what exactly do you mean by extreme misogyny? A lot of people would say, calling women menstruators or cervix havers, or saying that a man can become a woman by putting on a dress. Some people would say that that's extreme misogyny. Other people would say the wearing of the burqa essentially is based on an idea that a woman can't be seen in public. Some people would see that as constituting extreme misogyny, which is becoming more prevalent in our culture. People, especially in London, you'll see more people wearing burqas. But that's not what she's referring to. She is referring to online influencers, male influencers. Gives the example of Andrew Tate, who seems to come up quite a lot in these discussions, who's in America. Well, I think he's based in America now, but it should be worth saying, Andrew Tate is a Muslim himself, and some of his ideas about women come from Islam. So he rejects Christian Western ideas of monogamy and says men should have multiple wives and they should be very submissive to their husband and so on. So he's kind of placed as being right wing, but that's not quite the case either. He's a complicated figure. But essentially, this idea of making misogyny or extreme misogyny a extremist kind of terrorist claim is going to be used potentially by teachers to refer young boys to prevent young boys who are maybe looking at right wing influencers, who are maybe just discussing some of the things that they feel they can't discuss for whatever reason, and it would target them, which to me would only radicalise them further, surely, if their legitimate concerns are being mean that they're labelled as terrorists or potential terrorists. So the whole thing seems to be totally counterproductive and totally skirting over the real issue, which is the things that we talk about on this show.
But there is a kind of sort of prototype for this, isn't there? And I remember this was first mooted, this idea of misogyny being a hate crime, about 4 or 5 years ago. And in fact, one police force has adopted it, I believe, as a hate crime. But it hasn't gone any further. This is like ramping it up, isn't it?
Yeah.
How would you actually, if you've got a kid in a class and you're a teacher, what kind of thing would that kid have to say to be referred to prevent, do you think? What kind of thing?
We don't know at the moment, do we? I mean, it's all up in the air. But my guess is it will be something that is explicitly ideological, that can be seen to be right wing, and then that will be linked. There will be a connection to misogyny, how they do it. I think what's happening here is they are making the personal political. That's what they do with everything. The personal is political. And if we go along with that for a moment and we say, okay, well, then we can say, you've been indulging in misogyny for the last 3 or 4 years because the Labour government or the Labour Party has been completely behind autogynephilic males in all-female spaces, for example. That is, to me, that is a clear instance of misogyny. And the government has been absolutely in line to attack TERFs as well. I've been teaching for 25 years. Okay, I've been teaching in higher education and not secondary education. But this kind of classroom authoritarianism, this classroom censorship, my God knows we've got enough of it already. But if I were to be in a position to say, well, you've said something that's I perceive to be misogynistic, and it meets a certain threshold where I have to report you for being a terrorist, that's one of those moments, isn't it? That's one of those moments where you think we would have talked about this 5 years ago. I know this was mooted 4 years ago, but say we would have talked about this 2019, we would have said, this is ridiculous. This could never happen. And yet here we are. It starts with pronouns, and we get through male rapists in female prisons. Now we're making children terrorists. It's absurd.
But how far down the line is it? Is it a proposal or what? Or is this going to be included in some legislation? Do we know that yet? It came from the Home Secretary, didn't it?
Yeah, I don't know what form it's going to take, but of course we know this is very similar to what we are expected to come down in terms of Islamophobia, right? And how do you define what is Islamophobia? Is genuine criticism of Islam Islamophobic? Now, we know full well, you were asking what would qualify as misogyny in the classroom. Well, we know full well that the criteria, according to Prevent, to determine whether somebody was far right in the classroom, that could include liking Douglas Murray's works. That could include, I think it was enjoying Brideshead Revisited. It's the most bizarre things from the past would qualify you as being eligible to be referred to the Prevent program. So conceivably, if you if you agree with Joey Barton that women, there are a lot of women commentators that are lousy at commentating on sport, that could possibly raise a red flag, quite literally, or just saying that you don't think women's football is worth watching or shouldn't be on television. That's all stuff which should not be considered misogynistic at all. There's genuine misogyny, and there's genuinely a problem with the incel community, but to pretend that it's on the same level as Islamic terrorism, and that's the one I think that for me is the biggest issue here is, the Prevent program has limited finances, limited resources, and it's being diluted. Its real purpose is to combat Islamic extremism. Islamic terrorism is the issue. 99% of terrorist activities are Islamic, and it's already, the William Shawcross report showed how much energy was being spent on the infinitesimally small far-right community, and yet again we're going to have even more deflection now into the area of misogyny, when we know if you want to tackle real misogyny, it is the Islamic community where you will find it. And to go back to your previous point, not only are people reluctant to discuss this, the government, the Conservative government, was actively suppressing any recording by the ONS of the ethnicity of people who are committing these crimes. So we have to look to Denmark to get any idea of what degree different ethnic communities are committing certain types of crime. And we saw from Denmark, of course, that we know it's people of Afghanistan, Syrians and Sudanese and so forth who are committing these crimes. We don't have that evidence for the UK, and it's, anyone who is in favour of free and open discussion should, the more information the better, but there's a deliberate attempt by our established elite to try to suppress this information because they know how dangerous it is.
Yes, I mean, just to make the point, they suppress it on the one hand and they divert our attention on the other. Yes. If we're looking at, a handful of boys who are looking at some fairly extreme stuff online, that really isn't going to deal with the problem. To deal with the problem, you ask women who commute in the Greater London area. You ask women who work in the Greater London area. You ask women who socialise. That's the only sample you need. They'll tell you who the misogynists are. They'll tell you who's committing the sex crimes here. It's very simple, and you can then map that onto the faraway towns and cities. It will be exactly the same thing. It's a similar kind of thing that I said about Huddersfield last week. And that Amy just said before. It's easy enough to see, but they suppress the information, they suppress the data, and they divert our attention to stupid things.
Also, because you mentioned Andrew Tate, and of course, as people are often now saying, every politician will say the rise in misogyny is because of people like Andrew Tate. Well, look, I have no evidence to support this in terms of statistics, but I've been to Andrew Tate's profile, and if you look at Andrew Tate's profile, the vast majority of the responses, or the great preponderance of the responses, seem to come from people from immigrant backgrounds. So even there we can see a clear link perhaps between the changing demographics of this country and the people who are supporting people like Andrew Tate, and yet that's never spoken about. And this goes back to what you were saying just before in terms of the government and others not being willing to discuss this issue. They're actively suppressing it. The Office of National Statistics does not record the ethnicity, or the nationality rather, I should say, because they do have ethnicity for prison populations. They don't record the nationality of people who are committing crimes. So we have to look elsewhere. We have to look to places like Denmark. And if you look at Denmark, who does record this information, you can quite clearly see that things like sexual assault and rape and so forth, the highest proportion of that are for people who come from North Africa and from the Middle East. And yet we are being deliberately denied this. They are deliberately trying to suppress that in this country. Anyone should clearly want to tackle this. You tackle this by having as much information as possible so you know what the problem is and how to address it. And that information is being deliberately suppressed by our government, by the Tories, firstly, and I'm sure under Labour too, because they're too scared for the public to know the reality.
Amy, you mentioned misogyny as we're talking about terrorism here. I have to make this point. We're discussing it like a hate crime.
Yeah,
actually.
I was thinking that.
And the fact is that actually I'm of the view that misogyny shouldn't even be a hate crime. Actually, we should take the whole idea of hate out of the law. Actually, because it then starts to go very, very wide. But what actually would a misogynistic terrorist act be?
I don't know, because
would
it's
it be
not
rape? What?
Well, of course, but there's laws for rape and murder and sexual assault already. I mean, it would be a politically motivated act of terrorism, wouldn't it? But I don't know that there would be we have far left, far right kind of terrorism, and then there's Islamic terrorism. I don't know of an ideology that's based solely in misogyny that you could claim is being used to influence politics. I don't even know what that would be. So it's very bizarre. And as a lot of commentators have been saying, if you're going to include extreme misogyny as part of this counter-extremism laws, then why not extreme misandry? Why not sexism towards men? Or sexism, if you can have sexism towards women. I don't think there should be either. Essentially what's happening is you're getting the protected characteristics of the Equality Act, which have already been used in hate crime laws, now entering into anti-terrorist laws. So, why not have, extreme homophobia as a part of this? Exactly. But the point is, the reason why we haven't included any of these in terrorist laws is because, as you say, there aren't any terrorist attacks being committed that are based solely on an ideology that hates women.
It's
bizarre.
It just insidiously creeps into our private lives, doesn't it? And it's in many ways, it's not dissimilar to the free school meals for children. All children should have free school meals for children. This is the state encroaching on something that is fundamentally personal. And this is the same thing, although it's a completely different thing, but it's still the state saying, regulating how people behave towards one another. And in the past, always in the past, this has been self-regulatory. This is, we've been able to do this ourselves. We've been able to, there are laws, but they aren't specific laws. They're different laws. So I'm doing the same thing now. What fucking laws? I don't know. Let me go back. In the past, we've been able to regulate ourselves, mainly because we've had a culture that has enabled us to do that. We've had a shared understanding of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And yes, of course, misogyny and misandry has happened time and time again, but fundamentally it's outside of those boundaries. Now we have government, we have authorities telling us what we should be doing because we don't have the confidence in the broader culture to provide a sense of rules and regulations for us.
Did Yvette Cooper actually use the word terrorism?
Extremism. But again, Amy just said, of course, quite rightly, that there's, terrorists don't have, there are no misogynistic terrorists, except that I would say that you could easily interpret the Taylor Swift threats as being a direct attack on women who should not be dancing according to radical Islamists. Also, the Ariana Grande Manchester bombing. There's a reason that those types of venues are being targeted because, of course, these cultures do have a problem with young women expressing themselves in these ways.
Well, what about I suppose we can talk about the few details we know, but this character who actually took a cab to Southport. He must have known what was happening there. He was very clear, was he not, about where he was going? Little girls, dancing around. Very specific. Now, all of those things tend to me, if you want to talk about terrorism, sounds like a premeditated act completely.
It's very interesting that whole incident wasn't talked about in terms of misogyny or sexism, that it was a Taylor Swift dance class. It's a very feminine, female-orientated event with little girls and women dance teachers. And as Ray says, we had the Ariana Grande bombing, and we've had other incidents of, and Taylor Swift's recently been targeted again. It's very interesting that the things that get held up as misogyny or sexism and the things that don't, because it was never really spoken about in those terms. As you say, it was fought through, the man targeted that particular place, and no consideration's really been given to that in the media.
It's interesting, actually, with this obsession, as you say, with Andrew Tate. He wasn't a Muslim until quite recently. His infamy was there already. It's almost like he decided to become a Muslim almost to fit it, in a way. I mean, it was this kind of very take what you want, you're a man type of thing. I mean, it's very, very common on the internet. But I'm not sure how much it goes off the internet into something else. You mentioned incels earlier. This is a thing, isn't it? Definitely. But, aren't they the type of people who then go and shoot up a school or something like that, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, there has been no terrorist attack in this country or elsewhere that I know of that was based on the ideas of Andrew Tate or anyone else like that, has there?
No. Anyway, I mean, it's as you say, words are incredibly important. How many more times are we going to say Orwellian is overused? But I mean, is it not that? I mean, when these things are being, pathologized in this way.
The really frightening thing is, I find myself, and I know other people are the same, we just find ourselves slipping into this double think where we see what they are imposing on us, and then I just do a kind of mental calculation and I think, oh, it's about that, it's about something else. And this has happened to me today, actually, coming here. So I came here on the train, and there was this advert about fare dodgers, and it was a picture of a white professional male who was about 35. Alas, I'm not 35 anymore. Okay, a white professional male who's about 35. Yes, I'm sure maybe some of them dodge fares, but they're not the ones who dodge fares, really, and we know this. So you see that, and then you just make the mental calculation, and then you carry on with your life. That's happening so much, and it's so frightening that it's now happening in the law.
Speaking of words and what have you, slight change of tone, but nevertheless, I thought a fascinating one, really. There's a playwright called James Graham, who I have to say, actually, I interviewed once for the New Culture Forum for a book we did back in the days when we were purely kind of, literary. Very nice guy, actually. But he recently has complained about how you don't hear or see working class people in drama or in the arts. And I know, being a cultural historian, this is the sort of thing I would have thought you would have majored on. It's quite rare to actually hear a playwright actually say that and bring it up. He said it was probably at its worst point that he can remember. I mean, this is the guy, James Graham, who's done a play called Dear England, which is, I think, about the English football team.
Yeah, it's about Gareth Southgate.
But, I mean, would you say he's got a point?
I'd say he's got a point, but again, the devil's in the detail. So he made these comments at the McTaggart lecture, which is very famous, and people like Troy Kennedy-Martin and John Schlesinger and all those great figures in the past of this is at the television festival in Edinburgh. It happens every year. All these great figures have given these great lectures, but recently it's been people like Emily Maitlis, so things have changed. Okay, he said this, which is absolutely true. You can't fault him on the sentiment, but what has he done? He's currently got the Sherwood TV series, and the Sheriff of Nottingham is to be a young female queer actor. So I read that, and again, it's this code, isn't it? It's young, affluent, trendy, with the right political opinions. Right, that isn't working class people. Right, and that certainly isn't working class.
This is Robin Hood
boys.
that we're talking about.
This is
right?
Robin Hood, the Sherwood. The show is called Sherwood. And so he also said that when white guys start talking about diversity, most people have an inbuilt bullshit detector about that. He said that as well. So he's fairly hypocritical as far as I can see. And he really does represent the all talk, no action of the cultural industries. That's precisely what it's about. Everybody will say, oh, well, there aren't enough working class people. And then when you look at the training, when you look at the university degrees, when you look at how people get from being in school to working at the BBC or being a jobbing actor, all of those things, there's a filtering process, which essentially is there to get rid of working class people, you know, because what happens is middle class, chattering class, upper middle class people who already have people in the industry, parents in the industry, family members, friends, they get the jobs, okay? They're also the kind of people who can do voluntary work or placements for a year in London without getting paid. So there are all of these things that granulate, that filter people out. And the universities are right at the heart of it, I have to say, because I've been involved in teaching drama and teaching culture for the last 25 years. They talk a good talk, but the action just isn't there.
Isn't it just the general culture too? We've seen the most extraordinary rise in snobbery, and particularly classism. Yeah. Actually, classism wasn't even an expression once, was it? But
there's just one more thing. Sorry, there aren't the characters either. You know, I've talked about this at New Culture Forum conferences. You know, working class characters just aren't on television anymore. And so, you know, if you're going to be authentic, as people love actors to be, where are the characters? You're not going to be able to play them because they're just not there anymore.
The reason for that is, I mean, if you were to authentically portray the working class now, I mean, the BBC and the liberal elite feel that the working classes have absolutely betrayed them because they voted for Brexit. If you used to have a working class character now, you know, the chances would be that they voted for Brexit. They may know someone that was affected by the grooming gangs. They may have lost their job because a low-skilled worker took it, an immigrant. They may be affected by asylum seekers living in a hotel near where they live. But you could never portray any of that on the BBC. You couldn't have a drama about any of those issues. So how could they portray an authentic working class character? They couldn't.
I think I was going to say it's like exactly... You could make, is there not a huge amount of dramatic potential in those kind of scenarios? So you've got an elderly couple or whatever who see their environment changing around them. I would have thought that was rich in drama and everything. The idea that you would get them, they would have to be made into either outright bigots or worse still, psychopaths.
Yes, or it just would be absolutely ideologically inflected, like our friends in the north, for example. But the past has been full of working class, not only actors but directors, writers. Wednesday Play, Play for Today. You know, all of the great series, Sweeney, and all of that. These have all revolved around working class males, and it seems to me that the last 20 years has been an absolute reaction to all of that stuff. So we're not going to get working class people on the screen anytime soon.
But to come to his defence, that's precisely what he was saying in the lecture, is that the platforms, the avenues by which the working class could become more prominent have gone because of budget cutbacks. It's easier to put on a reality TV show than to invest in a proper drama and so forth. I mean, the last vestiges of working class television are, of course, EastEnders, Coronation Street, but they're very few and far between now. But you don't have the programming that used to be there. And of course, the diversity quotas apply to everybody except for the white working class. So there's been such a proactive movement to get, you know, black people and women and the disabled and gays and trans into all sorts of programming. None of that is being done to the white working class, who of course we know are the most disadvantaged group in society. My main issue is, though, to get back to what... I should say also, the solution of this chap, though, is to entrust people like Russell T Davies with producing new programming. Of all people, the man who destroyed Doctor Who is not the way that I would go. But my main issue is getting people behind the scenes. This is where change really should happen, because again, there's a lot of diversity in front of the camera. There's very little diversity at the BBC. Everyone there still is primarily white, middle class, cool pipper, the same people who are at Just Stop Oil protests. And it is nepotism and so forth. And I just listened to Radio 4 this morning, and they had the academic experts discussing this topic, and they were all blaming the Tories for criticising arts courses for students. No, it's the nepotism. It's the degree to which it can only be rich to get on the internships. That's where the change needs to happen. And the working class are really one of the last hopes we have for a revival of traditional Britain. And I think it's only once they get behind the cameras, once they get into our media, into our university administrations, that I think we have any realistic chance of a proper fight back.
I think it was actually the media, generally journalism and television, were the great classless professions. And so, in fact, some of the great journalists, columnists of the 60s and 70s came from working class, grammar school maybe, your Melvin Braggs, people like this.
A lot of the white working class Londoners or the Cockneys have been driven out of London. So dramas about London now, you wouldn't see that demographic. I mean, I was thinking about, I grew up watching EastEnders. I haven't watched it for ages, but I can't even imagine what that would be like now, because most of the East End, if you look at Whitechapel or Tower Hamlets, the majority of the population are Bangladeshi. So would EastEnders have to be in, even in different language? You would have to have Bangladeshi subtitles. It'd be so different. So it's becoming harder and harder to represent that group of people, because they are losing their identity anyway.
Yeah, I think actually that when EastEnders started, which was 85, I think, 1985, it was just about still believable, but it was getting to be a polite fiction even then, actually. The idea that everyone would go around the pub and yes, exactly,
like Coronation Street.
It wasn't really.
I think there's one more point to make, and it's not just about television; it's about the whole of the creative industries. Okay, so if you think about theatre, for example, which is probably the worst offender, and British film as well, there are no working class people there whatsoever. Mainly just for one reason only: it's just so woke. They won't go there.
Well, that's it actually, although we do have just a few more minutes for our members, a bit more exclusive material. So if you want to see that every week, you've got to become a member. But anyway, in the meantime, thank you very much, Rafe. Thank you very much, Amy and Philip. And we shall see you next time. Thank you. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.